Hey guys, welcome to the Story and History channel. Today, I bring you an exciting narrative that will transport us to the streets of Salvador, where whispered words and unexpected encounters change the course of journalism. Get ready to dive into the story of the Silence of the Brooms, inspired by the real-life story of the cleaner who invaded the live broadcast of the newspaper and left the presenter disconcerted. Leave your like, share with friends, subscribe, and activate the bell so you don't miss the next stories on the Story and History channel. On that scorching sunny morning, Alice Santana was sweeping the floor of the newsroom of the newspaper of Voz de Bahia. His light footsteps echoed through the hallway, but no one seemed to notice his presence. Reporters were typing frantically on their typewriters, editors were discussing headlines, and the producer, Mariana Costa, was running back and forth with an air of urgency. Alice was a middle-aged woman with calloused hands and tired eyes. Her faded apron and worn broom were her faithful companions. She had worked there for years, invisible to the eyes of the most important employees. But she knew that her role was vital to the functioning of that place. Carlos Almeida, the famous evening news presenter, was the only one who occasionally crossed his path. He greeted her with a nod, but never stopped to talk. Alice wondered if he even knew her name. That afternoon, while sweeping the empty studio, Alice heard muffled voices coming from the editing room. Curious, she peeked through the crack in the half-open door. Carlos and Mariana were arguing heatedly. The presenter gestured, his eyes flashing with anger. "We can't lose the audience, Mariana. We need an impactful story for the next edition," said Carlos, slamming his hand on the table. Mariana sighed. "I know, Carlos, but we're out of agenda. The news is always the same. Corruption, violence, dirty politics. We need something new." Alice gripped the broom tighter. She had a story, a life of struggles and sacrifices. But who would care about a cleaning lady? She was just the silence of brooms, the echo of unnoticed footsteps. That night, while watching the news in her modest home, Alice saw Carlos Almeida on the screen. He talked about the search for authentic stories, about the importance of giving a voice to the invisible in society. She felt a twinge of hope. What if she could tell her own story? What if Carlos heard her? Alice decided it was time to stop being invisible. She wasn't just a cleaning lady. She was a woman with dreams, with a voice that needed to be heard. Alice decided it was time to act. The next morning, while sweeping the studio, she mentally rehearsed what she would say to Carlos Almeida. His calloused fingers gripped the broom tightly, as if holding back his courage. Carlos was in the studio, reviewing the scripts for the evening news. He looked tense, eyes fixed on the computer screen. Alice took a deep breath and approached. "Excuse me, Mr. Carlos," she said, her voice shaking. "I have a story to tell." Carlos looked at her, surprised. "You're the cleaning lady, right?" Alice nodded. "Yes, it's me. But I'm not just a cleaning lady. I have a life, a story that needs to be heard." Carlos frowned. "What do you mean?" Alice began to speak. She told about her sick husband, about the sleepless nights caring for the children, about the bills that were piling up. She described the daily struggle to survive, to maintain her dignity even when no one saw her. Carlos listened to her in silence. His eyes, once hard and distant, were now filled with compassion. He realized he had ignored so many stories like Alice's, focusing only on the sensational headlines. "You're right," said Carlos, touching Alice's shoulder. "We need to give a voice to the invisible, show the humanity behind the news." That night, the news was different. Carlos Almeida presented a special report on Alice Santana, the cleaning lady who invaded the live broadcast. He showed his life, his struggles, his tears. The audience watched, moved. And so, Alice stopped being the silence of the broomsticks. She became the voice of those who lived on the margins, the forgotten. And Carlos learned that the real stories were between the lines, in the tired looks and calloused hands. The report about Alice Santana echoed through the streets of Salvador. People were talking about the cleaning lady who had invaded the live broadcast. At markets, in bars, and on street corners, Alice's name was pronounced with respect and curiosity. Carlos Almeida, now with a closer look, visited Alice's modest house. He saw the peeling walls, the wood stove, and the portraits of his children on the wall. Sophia, the youngest daughter, ran to hug him, her eyes shining. "Thank you for telling our story, Mr. Carlos," said Alice, with tears in her eyes. No one ever cared before. Carlos felt a tightness in his chest. He had spent years focused on the sensational headlines, the tragedies, and the scandals. But now, in front of Alice and her family, he realized that there was something more important: humanity. He decided to do more. Carlos invited Enrique, Alice's eldest son, for an internship at the newsroom. "You have talent, boy," said Carlos. "I want you to tell the stories that really matter." Enrique accepted with gratitude. He wanted to be a journalist, but he didn't want to follow in the superficial footsteps of many of his colleagues. He wanted to be like Carlos, someone who saw beyond appearances. And so, the writing of A Voz to Bahia changed. The headlines were now about real people, about struggles and overcoming. Mariana Costa, the producer, embraced the change with enthusiasm. She realized that the audience wanted more than tragedies. They wanted hope and empathy. Alice continued to work as a cleaner, but now her voice echoed through the station's corridors. She became a kind of counselor to journalists, reminding them that every story had a face, a soul. And Carlos Almeida? He smiled more, his eyes shining. He had learned that the real news was between the lines, in the tired looks and calloused hands, and he was grateful every day for having heard the cleaning lady's voice. The success of the report on Alice Santana reverberated beyond the borders of Salvador. Other broadcasters began to follow the example of A Voz to Bahia, dedicating themselves to telling human and authentic stories. Carlos Almeida became a symbol of change in journalism, and his attentive look inspired a generation of young reporters. Enrique, now an intern in the newsroom, dove headfirst into the stories that really mattered. He interviewed fishermen, recyclable collectors, street artists, and public school teachers. Each story was a window into the soul of the city, a way of giving voice to those who were previously ignored. Alice continued to work as a cleaner, but her influence spread like a gentle breeze. She became a kind of oracle for journalists, always with a word of wisdom or a detail hidden between the lines. His broom didn't just sweep the floor. It also swept away prejudices and conventions. One afternoon, while Alice was cleaning the studio, Carlos Almeida approached. His gray hair was messier than usual, and there was a twinkle in his eyes. "You changed everything, Alice," he said. "This silent revolution that started with you is transforming journalism." Alice smiled. "It wasn't me, Carlos. It was the city. The stories were here all along, waiting to be told." Carlos nodded. "You are right. And now, we have a mission: to show that every life matters." That night, during the news, Carlos made a surprising announcement. He invited viewers to submit their own stories, promising that each would be heard and considered. The newsroom was flooded with stories of love, loss, overcoming, and hope. Enrique, with shining eyes, read every email and letter. He knew he was witnessing something special, a paradigm shift that would transcend the day's headlines. And so, the city became an open book, its pages full of real lives. Alice continued to sweep the floor, but now her broom also swept the hearts and minds of those who heard her. The movement started by Alice and Carlos gained strength. Stories sent in by viewers flooded the newsroom. Enrique, now a rising reporter, read each report with devotion. He knew he was witnessing something special, a paradigm shift that would transcend the day's headlines. One of these stories touched him deeply. It was about Dona Rosa, an 80-year-old woman who lived in a simple house in the Ribera neighborhood. Dona Rosa used to sit by the window every morning, watching passers-by and smiling at the children on their way to school. Enrique visited Dona Rosa. She greeted him with a wrinkled smile and eyes full of wisdom. Sitting on the porch, she began to talk about her life. She talked about her husband who left too soon, about her children who followed their own paths, and about the homesickness that followed her like a shadow. "But I'm not sad, young man," said Dona Rosa. "I have my memories and my words. They are my treasure." Henry was intrigued. "Words?" Dona Rosa nodded. "Yes, the words I write in my diary every night. They are my silent companions, my confidants. They remind me that every life is a story, and every story is important." Enrique realized that Dona Rosa was like Alice. She also had a voice, even if it was only in the yellowing pages of her diary. He decided to write about her words that echoed through the city streets. The article about Dona Rosa was published in A Voz de Bahia. People were moved by the old lady's story and her words written by candlelight. The movement gained a new motto: every word matters. Alice, upon reading the article, smiled. She knew that words were like seeds planted in the fertile soil of the city. They would germinate, grow, and flourish, transforming the barren landscape into a garden of stories. And so, the silent revolution continued. Journalists now looked not just for the headlines, but also for the subtext. And Dona Rosa? She continued to write her words, knowing that, even in silence, they had the power to change the world. Alice's diary was a hidden treasure. She kept it under the mattress, among the worn sheets and yellowed memories. Each page was filled with his careful handwriting, the words flowing like a silent river. That afternoon, as the sun set over Todos os Santos Bay, Alice sat at the kitchen table with her diary open. The candle flickered, casting shadows on the walls. She dipped her quill into the inkwell and began to write. Dear Diary, today was a special day. Carlos Almeida came to me, his eyes full of curiosity. He wanted to know more about the words that echo in my mind as I sweep the newsroom floor. I told him about the stories that live in the between the lines, about the hearts that beat silently in the unspoken words. Carlos listened attentively, like a student thirsty for knowledge. He understood that every life is a story, and every story is important. He promised to continue our silent revolution, scattering words like seeds in the wind. But, dear diary, there is something more. A story I haven't told anyone yet. A story that lives in me like an old song. My husband, Jose, left 5 years ago. He was a simple man, with calloused hands like mine. He taught me to love words, to see the beauty in small things. When he fell ill, I held his hand and whispered words of comfort. He closed his eyes and left, but his words stayed with me. Today, when I swept the studio, I felt Jose's presence. He was there, between the lines, smiling at me. And I knew it was time to share her story. Dear Diary, I'm going to write about Jose. I'm going to tell you about his hands that fixed everything, about his laughter that filled the house. I will remember the words we exchanged, the secrets we shared. And so, my voice will join Dona Rosa's, and that of so many others. Our words will intertwine, forming a tapestry of stories that will echo through the city streets. See you tomorrow, my faithful companion. Alice closed the diary and blew out the candle. Darkness enveloped her, but she knew her words would shine like stars, guiding lost hearts. Alice woke up to the sun pouring through the window. The diary was next to him, the pages still empty. She sat up in bed and looked at the street outside. People hurried past, their faces hidden behind masks and worries. She took the pen and began to write. Dear Diary, today is a special day. Jose is with me, like a gentle breeze that comes through the window. He whispers words of love to me, words that don't need to be said out loud. Jose was a man of few words. He preferred silence, communication that happened beyond syllables. When he looked at me, I understood everything. His eyes were open books, full of stories that only I could read. He taught me to listen to silence. On nights when the city was asleep, we would sit on the porch and watch the stars. He pointed to the sky, and I understood. We didn't need words. Today, as I was sweeping the studio, I felt Jose next to me. He smiled, and I knew it was time to tell our story. Not the story of a man who left, but the story of a love that transcends time. Dear Diary, I'm going to write about Jose. I'm going to describe his hands that held mine, his laughs that echoed through the walls of our house. I will remember the moments when silence spoke louder. And so, my voice will join Dona Rosa's, and that of so many others. Our words will intertwine, forming a symphony of stories that will echo forever. See you tomorrow, my faithful companion. Alice closed the diary and smiled. Jose was there, in the words she wrote. And the city? She continued to spin, her stories hidden between the lines, waiting to be heard. The city of Salvador was different. People walked the streets with more attentive eyes, listening to what previously went unnoticed. The newspapers printed stories of love, overcoming, and empathy. And at the center of it all was Alice, the cleaning lady who broke into the live broadcast and changed the course of journalism. Enrique continued to write, his words flowing like a river. He interviewed the invisible, the forgotten, those who lived between the lines. Dona Rosa, now a local celebrity, smiled at the children who passed by her house. She knew her words had power, even if they were whispered in the wind. Carlos Almeida, the man who started it all, looked at the horizon. He knew that the silent revolution was not just about words. It was about connections, about looks that met and understood. He wondered how many stories were still hidden, waiting to be told. Alice, in her modest apartment, picked up the diary. She wrote, "Dear Diary, today is a new day. The city has awakened, and your words echo like bells. Jose is with me, as always. He whispers to me stories of love, of longing, of life. Today, while sweeping the studio, I saw Carlos Almeida looking at the sky. He smiled at me, and I knew he too heard the words floating in the air. Dear Diary, our silent revolution continues. Brooms sweep the floor, but they also sweep hearts. The words intertwine, forming an invisible web that connects us. See you tomorrow, my faithful companion." Alice closed the diary and looked out the window. The city was alive, pulsing with stories. And her? She would continue to sweep the floor, listening to the silence that spoke louder. Time passed, and the city of Salvador flourished with the stories that echoed through the streets. Alice continued to sweep the floor of the newsroom, but now her broom was also sweeping the journalists' hearts. She had become a legend, a mysterious figure who inspired everyone to listen to the silence. Enrique, now an experienced reporter, wrote about the invisible, the forgotten, those who lived on the margins of society. He interviewed fishermen, recyclable collectors, street artists. Every word was a tribute to Alice, Dona Rosa, and everyone who had changed the course of journalism. Carlos Almeida, the man who started it all, looked at the horizon. He knew his career was no longer about sensational headlines, but about the stories that really mattered. He wondered how many lives had been touched, how many hearts had been opened. Dona Rosa, now a wise old woman, sat by the window every morning. She watched the children on their way to school, the hurried passers-by. His eyes sparkled, full of memories and hope. She knew her words had spread like seeds, germinating in hearts hungry for connection. And so, the legacy continued. The words were like invisible threads that tied the city together. Journalists, readers, everyone was part of this web of stories. And Alice? She continued to sweep the floor, listening to the silence that spoke louder. The city of Salvador was on the boil. Stories flowed through the streets like rivers, fueling residents' curiosity and empathy. Journalists, now more sensitive to the lines, sought out the silent voices that previously went unnoticed. Enrique, with his sharp pen, interviewed the city's characters. He wrote about the fishermen who faced the storms, about the recyclable collector who found treasures in the trash cans, about the street artist who painted dreams on the gray walls. Every word was a tribute to the silent revolution. Carlos Almeida, the veteran journalist, looked at the horizon. He knew his mission went beyond the headlines. He wanted to tell the stories that made hearts beat faster, that brought people together in an invisible embrace. He wondered how many lives had been touched, how many eyes had crossed. Dona Rosa, now a living legend, continued to smile at the children who passed by her house. She knew her words had spread like butterfly wings. She wrote in her diary every night, her hands shaking but full of purpose. His words were like birds that flew beyond the windows, carrying messages of love and hope. And so, the legacy grew. The words were like invisible threads that tied the city together. Journalists, readers, everyone was part of this web of stories. And Alice? She continued to sweep the floor, listening to the silence that spoke louder. Alice felt the weight of the words on her shoulders. She continued to sweep the newsroom floor, but now her mind was elsewhere. Jose, Dona Rosa, Carlos Almeida, they all lived inside it, like characters in a novel that unfolded every day. One afternoon, While sweeping the studio, Alice heard footsteps behind her. She turned around and saw a man standing in the doorway. He had gray hair and curious eyes. It was Carlos Almeida. "Sorry to interrupt, Alice," he said, "but I needed to meet you in person." His story inspired the entire city. Alice smiled. "Carlos, you are also part of this story." His words opened doors, changed lives. He nodded. "But you, Alice, are the real hero. You showed us that words have power, even when whispered." They talked for hours. Carlos wanted to know more about Jose, about Dona Rosa, about every detail that Alice had hidden between the lines. He realized that the silent revolution was not just about journalism. It was about connections, about the stories that brought people together. That night, as Alice wrote in her diary, she knew she had found a friend. Carlos Almeida was not just a journalist. He was a storyteller, a keeper of words. And so, the city continued to spin, with its stories hidden in the corners, waiting to be told. Alice, with her broom and her diary, knew that silence could also speak loudly. The meeting with Carlos Almeida marked a turning point for Alice. He invited her for an interview on A Voz de Bahia, wanting to hear more about her journey, her words, and her unique vision of the world. Alice accepted, but on one condition: that Dona Rosa was also present. That afternoon, the three gathered in the studio. Dona Rosa, with her white hair and lively eyes, smiled at Alice. "You are the voice that echoes, my dear. Keep telling our stories." Carlos Almeida, with his recorder in hand, asked questions about the power of words, about the silent revolution that had transformed the city. Alice talked about Jose, about the hands that held hers, about the moments when silence said more than any sentence. Dona Rosa also shared her memories. She talked about her husband who had left, about her children who had gone their own way. "Words are like birds," she said. "They fly beyond the windows, carrying messages of love and hope." The interview aired that night. Alice and Dona Rosa's words echoed across the radio waves, reaching the hearts of listeners. The city stopped to listen, to reflect on the power of the stories that lived between the lines. And so, the legacy continued. Alice, Dona Rosa, and Carlos Almeida became symbols of a new era of journalism. They showed that words don't need to be shouted. They can be whispered, written, felt. On the last page of her diary, Alice wrote, "Dear Diary, today I end this journey. Jose, Dona Rosa, Carlos Almeida, they are all part of me. Their words fly like birds, uniting the city, transforming lives. Until forever, my faithful companion." And so, the city continued to turn, with its stories hidden in corners, waiting to be told. And so, we end another story here on the channel. If you liked it, leave a like, share with friends, subscribe, and activate the bell so you don't miss the next stories on the Story and History channel. Until next time, and remember, every word matters.